Today I want to tell you a story, a wonderful Christmas story written by Raymond MacDonald Alden. It was written many years ago. It's a story that's delightful and warm, and I pray that you will be blessed by it, as indeed have many others. It's called Why the Bells Chimed. Once in a faraway country stood a wonderful church. It stood high on a hill in the centre of a great city. And every Sunday, as well as on sacred days like Christmas, thousands of people climbed the hill to see its great archways. The church was very austere, but when it was lit up for a festival and crowded with people, it was simply stunning. The strangest thing about the old building was the wonderful chime of bells. At one corner of the church was a great grey tower, with ivy growing up over it as far as the eye could see. Now all the people knew that at the top of the tower was a chime of Christmas bells. They'd hung there ever since the church had been built, and they were the most beautiful bells in the world. And no one who had heard those chimes denied that they were also the sweetest in the world, some describing them like angels singing in the sky, others as sounding like strange winds singing through the trees. But the fact was that no one had ever heard those bells for years and years and years. And there was an old man living not far from the church who said that his mum, when she was a little girl, said that she remembered hearing them every single week when she was a child. But he wasn't so sure. They were Christmas bells, you see, and were not meant to be played by men on common days or women on ordinary days. But they were special bells, they were Christmas bells. And it was the custom on Christmas Eve for all the people to bring to the church their offerings to the Christ child. And then, when the greatest and the best of the offerings was laid on the altar, there would come sounding through the music of the choir the Christmas chimes far up in the tower. Some said that the wind rang them, others that it was the wind, but for many years they'd simply not been heard. It was said that people were growing less careful with their gifts for the Christ child, and that no offering had ever now been bought that deserved the music of the chimes, every gift getting better than the other, without giving anything, however, that he wanted for himself. And the church again was crowded with those who thought that perhaps the most wonderful bells might be heard again. But although the services were splendid and the offerings were plenty, only the roar of the wind could be heard far up that stone tower. In a nearby village lived a boy called Pedro and his little brother. They knew very little about the Christmas bells, but they had heard of the service in the church on Christmas Eve each year, and they had a secret plan. And they talked that plan over when they were by themselves to go and see one day that amazing service and beautiful celebration of the Christ child. Nobody can guess, little brother, Pedro would say, all the fine things that there are to see and hear there. And I've even heard it said that the Christ child himself sometimes comes down to bless the service. What if we could see him? The day before Christmas one year, it was bitterly cold, and a few lonely snowflakes flying in the air formed a white crust on the ground. Sure enough, Pedro and little brother left early in the afternoon, and although the walk was hard in the frosty air, before nightfall they trudged so far hand in hand until eventually they saw the lights of the big city ahead of them. They were just about to enter the city gates, but then they saw something dark on the snow near the path and stepped off the path to go and look at it. It was a poor woman who'd fallen just outside the city. She was too sick and too tired to get inside where she might find shelter and food. But she wasn't moving. The soft snow made a drift and a sort of pillow for her head, and she would soon be so sound asleep in the wintry air that nobody would ever waken her again. Pedro saw this in a moment, and he knelt down beside her and tried to rouse her, tugging at her arm a little, as though he would have tried to carry her away. He turned her face towards him so that he could rub some of the snow off it, and when he looked at her silently for a moment, he stood up and said, "It's no good, little brother. You'll need to go on alone." "Alone?" cried his brother. "And you not see the Christmas festival?" "No," said Pedro, and he could not quite keep back that choking sound in his throat. "See this poor woman. She'll freeze to death if nobody cares for her. Everyone now will have gone into the church. But when you come back, you can bring somebody with you to help her. I'll rub her face to keep her from freezing, and perhaps even get her to eat a little bit of the bun that's left in my pocket. But I can't bear to leave you alone," said his little brother. "We don't need both to miss the service," said Pedro. "So you go. You'll easily find your way to the church. But you must see and hear everything twice. Once for you and once for me. And I'm sure the Christ child must know how much I would love to be in there with you and to worship him. And oh, if you get a chance, slip up to the altar without getting in anybody's way and take this little silver piece of mine and lay it down for my offering to the Christ child while no one is looking. Don't forget where you've left me, though, and forgive me for not coming with you." So off the little brother went. The church looked wonderful. The organ played, and thousands of people sang. The walls shook with the sound, and little Pedro was amazed. At the close of the service came the procession with offerings to be laid on the altar. Rich men and great men marched proudly up to the altar and put their gifts down on it to the Christ child. Then, last of all, walked proudly down the aisle the king of the country, hoping with the rest of them to win for himself the chime of the Christmas bells. As he proudly walked down the aisle, there was a great murmur through the church as the people then saw the king take from his head the royal crown, all set with precious stones, and he lay it gleaming on the altar as his offering to the Christ child. "Surely," the king thought to himself, "we'll now hear the bells for my gift, which has to be the biggest gift ever." But nothing. The procession was over, and the choir began the closing hymn. Suddenly, the organist stopped playing, and everyone looked at the old minister who was standing by the altar, holding up his hands for silence. Not a sound could be heard from anyone in the church. But as all the people strained their ears to listen, they came softly but distinctly swinging through the air the sound of the Christmas chimes in the tower. All the people stared as one at the altar to see what great gift had awakened those long silent bells. But all the nearest of them saw was the childish figure of Pedro's little brother, who had crept softly down the aisle when no one was looking and had laid Pedro's little piece of silver on the altar. So you see, the boy had given his brother's piece of silver, given sacrificiously, not as the rich had done and just gave away what they didn't want, but like the widow and her mite, Pedro had given all that he had.